Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for high-performing women leaders who want to unlearn conventional rules, leave prestigious careers, and launch businesses of significance. Each week, She Rebel Radio brings you insights and advice from women entrepreneurs who transformed their prestige prisons into daring entrepreneurial success stories. Now, here is your host, Lulu Nins.
Welcome to episode 12 of She Rebel Radio, why contraction is the key to expansion. Initially, this was going to be the very first episode of She Rebel Radio back at the beginning of 2019, when I decided that this was a project that needed to get out there into the world. And then there were bumps in the road, as there always are. And I contracted before I expanded, got the support I needed to get the podcast out there into the world. And it feels really good to be sharing this with you on episode 12. Especially, this is, the bigger thinking really, but you can massively tie this into where you're at with your business right now, because we live in a society that values expansion over contraction. So during this episode, what we're going to do is dive into why that is and look at what happens when we expand without any contraction, and then how you can tie that into where you're at right now. And this feels like a perfect time of year to talk about this, because autumn is a time of year where we do start naturally to contract. It's 5 years within my business, and I know that this is the time of year that I'm really looking at what is not working, what do I need to start, changing and moving around. And sometimes that contraction needs to come in to be able to do that. So, and that's whilst you're also moving into the winter months. So certainly back in January of this year, I was really reducing all my outgoings in expenses and taking on less clients and really creating a foundation for myself that actually allowed the expansion that I needed in 2019, but it wouldn't have happened without the contraction and the process that I started looking at in the autumn. So I started asking those super important questions in the autumn. I went to some events that were really amazing for me, met some people, started having some new conversations, and then really contracting and going within and looking at the things that started to needed to change. And that was a real long process. And, my first year in business, for example, was a massive period of contraction where I brought in far less money than I ever had done before. I spent lots of time down the beach, but after years and years of expanding and expanding and expanding, I really needed that contraction to tune in with where I was going to expand into. And it was really important to have that period. And I know, as a woman who is in a position of prestige, that you are used to being of significance. So that step back almost into insignificance, it can feel like a step back, can feel really, really scary. But what I would love you to do is to start to reframe that actually maybe that contraction, that removal of myself from certain places, certain people, maybe your corporate job, whatever it might be, is actually essential for this next period of my life, for this next expansion. And if you are a year or two or maybe more into your business and the focus has been expansion, as it often is, then this is the time of year to start asking what it is that you need to start doing over the autumn and winter months to contract, to potentially become smaller, to potentially reduce expenses, in order to lay the foundation for what expansion your business is going to make in 2020. So it's a perfect time to do that. But let's dive into what contraction looks like in a very literal way, why we don't respect it and cherish it, and what happens if we just focus on expansion without contraction. So contraction is weaker. It's seen as weaker than expansion. And let me know if you agree with that. I would love to know. But we don't really, no one talks about, or it's very rare, how amazing it is to contract and become smaller and to shrink and to reduce. And within the body, it's a physical process where the muscles become shorter and tighter. But we need that process for so many essential things. We need it to breathe. When we breathe in, everything in our stomach, etc., contracts. When we breathe out, it all expands. We breathe in and then we breathe out. We need both the contraction and the expansion. As women, we need to contract to give birth. And I think the word contraction automatically also almost conjures up that image of contractions for women giving birth. And a big high five to all of you amazing mothers out there who have given birth, several of you more than once. So it's so important that the birth is not possible without the contraction. We also need it, ladies, for pleasure. We need it for orgasm. That's a rhythmic muscle contraction for pleasure. So women are unable to give birth and we're unable to have pleasure without the contraction, which men are unable to have the pleasure too, right? So it's essential, yet we don't value it. And as women, our energy is contracting and expanding throughout the month according to our menstrual cycle. Just as the moon is waxing and waning throughout the month, which is its own version of contracting and expanding. So why don't we value the contraction? If you've not seen where I'm going with this, and this was a real light bulb aha moment for me, before I designed the 24 Principles to Feminine Success course, I was like, contraction is a feminine principle. Expansion is the masculine one. And I'm not going to dive into a sex education class, ladies, but you know what I'm saying here, okay? In that sense. So, and it was actually the real inspiration for me designing the whole 24 Principles to Feminine Success course, because the deeper I go with this, with my clients and the work, and they were principles that I created to help me through my own journey first of being exhausted by the masculine, my masculine energy, by being exhausted by the constant expansion without the contraction, that I put the course together for those women just like you who've been in such a period of expansion and significance that you need to find your next expansion phase, but you don't know how to contract because you don't value it, because we don't value it as a society, because we don't value the feminine, right? We absolutely don't. But the real important message here is that the masculine can't exist without the feminine, and the feminine can't exist without the masculine. The polarity is what makes the world go round, and that polarity is around us everywhere. Things can't exist without its opposite. So the positive can't exist without the negative. Desire cannot exist without fear. For every subject, there are two subjects, and the polarity is that they can't exist without each other. And when we value one without not valuing the other, what we get is trouble, which we're going to dive into. And I want to read you a quote, which is from a book, a novel, and I knew I should have taken a note of it because it's now going to leave my mind, but it's going to come to me. The Light We Cannot See, that's what it's called. The Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. And it's an amazing book set in France in World War II, and women in particular, and the movements that they were making in the World War. And there is a quote that I read to my clients during a retreat in Goa, because I felt like that's where society was, and where so many things are coming to this real breaking point. And I know my clients are all on a very similar mission and journey to me in terms of really unlocking that feminine and leading from that space, because if the expansion continues without the contraction, this is what's going to happen. And this is the quote: "Everything radiates tension, as if the city has been built upon the skin of a balloon and someone is inflating it to breaking point." I'm going to read that again. "Everything radiates tension, as if the city has been built upon the skin of a balloon and someone is inflating it to breaking point." And we see that even more in 2019, because when I was reading this was in December 2018, on a beach in Goa at a yoga retreat with my clients, and every one of them resonated with that amazing, beautifully written quote. And that is what happens when we expand without contraction, because expansion is getting larger, it's growth, it's development, it's amplifying. And it's incredible if it has the contraction alongside it, because otherwise it's inflating to breaking point. And how many people do we see having mental health crisis, having nervous breakdowns? In nature, for example, if you had the expansion without the contraction, you get a tsunami. In human beings, if you just breathed out all the time, expand, 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 you'd explode. You'd literally spontaneously combust. And we almost feel that pressure in the world right now, because it's an invitation to invite the contraction back in. It's an invitation to invite the feminine back in. And that starts with each and every one of us on a one-to-one level of learning to value contraction just as much as you value expansion, because the more you contract, and again, all you need to do is sit on a beach and watch the sea going in and out. The bigger it goes out, the bigger the wave comes back. So actually, the braver you are in your periods of contraction, the more energy you'll muster and gather to have that next period of expansion. So what does that look like for you? What do you need to be doing at the end of 2019 to contract, to get smaller, to shrink, to reduce things in order to create the foundation and space for your expansion in 2020? And I'm going to leave that question with you. I would love to know your takeaways on that. So if you like this episode, please do rate us on the podcast. Also subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And do find us at the She Rebel Club to share your takeaways with what it is that you're going to be doing to contract in 2019. To get ready, I might add, for 2020.
Thanks for listening to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for high-performing women leaders who want to unlearn conventional rules, leave prestigious careers, and launch businesses of significance. She Rebel Radio is executive produced and hosted by women's advocate and coach Lulu Mins. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. You can find Lulu Mins on Facebook and LinkedIn at Lulu Mins, and on Instagram at LuluMins_biz. Until next week, keep rebelling against the rules and designing success your way.